There can be only one. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Requiem for Methuselah, which is episode 21 of season 3 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I cover every episode of Star Trek The Original Series, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the episode Requiem for Methuselah. So, Requiem for Methuselah is the episode where the Enterprise is affected by a plague and they go to this planet to find the medicine they need to cure the crew, but they encounter a man who has the superior technology, who's very rude and tells them they're trespassing, asks them to leave, but they insist they need to stay, so eventually he lets them stay, and he invites them to their home where he introduces Kirk to his adopted daughter, who Kirk thinks is hot and hits on profusely, and he also has these robots that threaten Kirk's life, and he insists the robots are just malfunctioning, and he's trying to refine the medicine for them, but really he's delaying because he, in fact, it is revealed that he is immortal and that he have lived for I believe it was 6,000 years, 4 or 6, I think it was 4,000 years, but he lived for a really long time, and he, created his adopted daughter is in fact not his adopted daughter. It is an android that he created to be his lover because he wanted to have someone who was also immortal like him, but he wanted to use Kirk in order to develop the android's emotions, but she also acquires a romantic attraction to Kirk, and Kirk wants her to go return back to the Enterprise with him, but Flint wants her to stay with him, and the conflicting desires, which she is not equipped to handle, self-destruct, and she dies. And then Kirk is sad, and they find out that Flint is no longer immortal because part of what was making him immortal was Earth's magnetosphere, and once he left that, he no longer was immortal and will live out a normal lifespan. In the meantime, Kirk is very sad over his girlfriend's death, and so Spock gives him a mind meld to wipe his memory. So, let me tell you my original encounter with this episode. So I first saw this episode when I was a teenager, as I explained in other videos before. Me and my sister were just all of a sudden decided to watch the original series and Next Generation, and we would record, and this was I believe, it was around 91. It was around the time that The Undiscovered Country came out. And so we would record on syndication, because this is the times before, DVD collections, and definitely before online streaming services. And so the only way to really watch it without spending crap ton of money on VHS was to watch it off on syndication. So we would just record it and keep videotapes of all the episodes that we recorded off of television. And this was one of the last episodes that I saw of the original series. Now, I didn't have a guide or anything. This is before I bought any of these, supplemental books that were like guides that had all the episodes listed and stuff like that. So I didn't really know what episodes existed, other than I've heard of a lot of episodes through, top tens and programs and word of mouth and things people talk about, magazines I used to buy. So of course I heard of all the big ones like Mirror Mirror, Amok Time, stuff like that before I even saw them. But nobody talks about this episode, so I had never heard of it, and I didn't know its existence. And I remember coming home while this episode was being recorded, and so I turned it on towards the end of the episode, and I saw the scene where Flint turns the Enterprise into this model. It's only a model, and this tiny model, and Kirk is like, "Oh my God," and he's looking. He just had that scene where you can see Kirk looking at on the view screen from the bridge, and he's like, "What'd you do to my crew?" No, it was Kirk saying, "What did you do to my crew?" Anyway, his acting's not too bad in this episode, to be fair. But anyway, and then I also saw the part where Flint was talking about how he's immortal and how he lived for thousands of years. And I was like, and as I said, I never heard of this episode. I never heard of this concept. So my mind was fucking blown. I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. They're actually doing an episode about an immortal. And there's like turning the Enterprise into a model. This is cool. And at the time, I believe I was really, really into the movie The Highlander, which I alluded to in my intro, about, of course, if you know The Highlander is a movie about, an immortal. I think this was before the sequel came out, but even if it wasn't, I screwed the sequels. I gave up on it. I never watched the TV show, by the way. That looked dumb. And but I used to love the original movie that came out in 1984, I believe. And I used to watch that repeatedly. I loved it. So I found the concept. I was like, hey, this guy's the fucking Captain Kirk who's meeting a Highlander. Like, this is cool. And so I was drawn in. And so later I went back and watched the entire episode. And sure, most of it was just them standing around talking and dancing and bullshit. And a lot of people would call it boring. But the fact that I already knew the ending, I was already hooked. So I was already fascinated by this episode. So this was considered one of my top 10 favorite episodes of the original series. Right up there with The Alternative Factor, which was my number one. I talked about that in other videos. This wasn't quite my number one, though. It was more like my number 8. But it was in that top 10. And I loved this episode, so I watched it repeatedly many times. So when I watched it just now, it was one of the episodes I was most familiar with. I could almost, not quite quote it from heart, but I was like, when I hear that music, that waltz that Spock was playing, that's supposed to be reminiscent of Brahms, because, Flint is Brahms. That's that musical piece, instantly was very nostalgic and brought up all these memories, and I could hum the tune. This is extremely familiar to me. Because I'd seen this episode so many times. And I think it's a very different experience from what most people have, because I've watched a few other reviews and podcasts on this episode recently, and they all say, I don't remember this episode. I only saw it once or twice. I kind of forgot that it even existed, and I was like, oh yeah, it's a very forgettable episode, and I don't really remember it. And of course, obviously, they don't like this episode, which is actually, as I learned later on in life, just like The Alternative Factor. Even though these are episodes I loved, most people don't like them. And unlike The Alternative Factor, which I'm still, I intellectually know why people don't like it, but it still boggles my mind, and I'm still stumped by it. Here, I get it. I can see why people wouldn't like this episode. First of all, the common criticism that most people have that they bring up on why this episode sucks is, in my opinion, very valid, and that is the love interest between Kirk and Reyna, the android. He knows her for 2 minutes, and he's madly in love with her, and so he's like, please, come and marry me, come live in a starship, I love you, you known her for 2 minutes, Kirk, calm the fuck down. So that is a huge flaw, and I will not deny that is a huge flaw, and I can totally get why a lot of people would say this episode sucks because of that flaw. But for me, and it's probably due to a lot of my nostalgia and my love of the premise of the whole immortal Highlander thing, I'm willing to brush that aside and ignore it and be like, yeah, that sucks, but the rest of the episode's cool. Now, I know a lot of people would actually disagree that the rest of the episode's cool because they'd probably say it's boring. But for me, and again, this is, most people barely remember it because they don't like it. They've only seen it once or twice and they forget all about it. But for me, it's one of those episodes like Mirror Mirror or, Trouble with Tribbles or City on the Outro Forever that I've seen so many times that I'm like intimately familiar with every scene, and it's very familiar to me, and I think, and I've always been entertained every time I watch it, even though I've seen it so many times, because I think it's a very again, and this is me also getting back to how I've mentioned this in other videos, that I'm very attracted to Season 3's dark feel, which is why I actually gravitated towards Season 3, where most people tell you Season 3 sucks and is a huge drop in quality from the previous two seasons, which I actually think I like Season 3 better than Season 2, because I always liked Season 3 better when I was a teenager, because I was into all really depressing dark stuff. I guess I wasn't really goth, but along those lines. I really like depressing things and dark things, so I was attracted more to the dark tone of Season 3 as opposed to Seasons 2 lighthearted, let's crack a stupid dumbass joke at the end of every episode and go to freaking westerns and planets that look just like Earth. I prefer this dark tone. Now, granted, Season 3, and I covered towards the end of covering Season 3, 3 of the worst episodes of the entire show, my least favorite shows, are all at the end of Season 3. So, and it also has other terrible episodes like Spock's Brain and Children Shall Lead. So, and Play the Stepchildren. And yeah, there are episodes in Season 3 I think I agree with everyone else. They absolutely suck. But a lot of the other episodes that people will say are either bad or mediocre, like this one, I actually really like. And a couple of them I love, like Whom Gods Destroy. Most people don't really like that. I love it, but I already covered that. So I've always had an affinity for Season 3, and this is one of the episodes I bring up as to why Season 3 is so great. Even though I know, and this for episode in particular, more so than Alternative Factor, I am willing to admit that it is a nostalgia. It is my own. I've always loved this episode. I remember loving this episode, and I like the premise, and I'm sort of have to hand wave away the terrible romance that is in this episode. Now, I don't consider this episode to be as good as I used to. I have gone down, like I would no longer put it in my top 10, for example, and I don't consider this one of the best episodes of the original series anymore, because I can no longer ignore just pretend that stupid romance thing doesn't exist. It does, and it's dumb. And so, yes, that does bring the episode down for me, but I still like everything else around it. I think it has a good pacing, and this is, again, maybe I disagree with most people why I like episodes like The Alternative Factor, because I like dialogue, slow-based stuff. It doesn't all have to be action, doesn't all have to have fluffy little balls, or fight scenes, or a fat guy pimping up hot chicks to be wives on the mining colony. I like sort of does the slow based dialogue intrigue, as long as it's intriguing like Alternative Factor and like this episode, which I found it very dark and foreboding that there's this plague running on the Enterprise that's like killing everyone else, and they're trying to get this medicine, but there's this dude with superior technology who's like standing in their way and like, no, I'm gonna fucking kill you if you get off my damn planet. That's intense. I like that, and even after that first confrontation, where they had that robot that goes doo 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 doo, and the robot, by the way, very obvious that it's like on a string. You can see it like bobbing, and one time it even like stops. So obvious that it's running a string, but it's supposed to be floating. But anyway, yeah, it's low hanging fruit for the original series. But anyway, yeah, so I always found that very interesting, very foreboding, and I like the intrigue of like the mystery of Spock trying to figure out something's off about this guy. He seems very weird, and he seems to be like toying with Kirk. Why is he delaying? Why won't he give them the medicine? Why is this adopted daughter seem very strange, like and meanwhile McCoy's trying to get this medicine, and people are gonna die, and he's like, oh, in a rush to get them. And so I find that very intriguing. Like, it grabs my attention, even though it is dialogue, it is slow paced. It has that sense of foreboding, like similar to the episode of The Changeling, which is another episode I love. I think people are more mixed on The Changeling, though, because I have a lot of people who said that's kind of mediocre and not that interesting, but they wouldn't say it outright sucks the way they would this episode. But I love The Changeling. Like, that's still one of my favorite episodes, and I think this has that same sort of sense of foreboding, that sort of dark sense, and particularly I love the sort of dialogue scenes between Flint and Kirk, because it is smartly written dialogue, and it is sort of strategic. It's kind of like they're playing each other out, and I think that's well done. And then when you get to the end, where you get the huge reveal of who Flint is, like, again, this is what I thought was fucking great. I was totally pulled in by the premise of this, like the concept that Enterprise would do this, and how he talked about how he, lived during the plague, and he was, certain characters and historical figures, Alexander the Great and whatnot, and that he lived for thousands of years, and the kind of cynical viewpoint he had after living through all these horrors is interesting, and how he because I guess he was so immortal, he had this advanced technology, he was able to easily overpower Kirk, but the only thing and he wanted to trap Kirk there because he didn't want anyone to find out about him. But the only thing Kirk and McCoy and Spock had over him was that Reyna wouldn't like it, and she would be pissed at him. And I thought it was a pretty powerful scene, a powerful point where McCoy is like, well, that's it. If you if you trap us, she's gonna hate you. I love that. That's like a haha, gotcha there moment. And then the tragic ending where she dies, and Kirk is depressed. Is the dark way to the end of the episode. So yeah. So I really liked it. But as I get older, and as I sort of analyze the episode more, especially like for what I'm doing now, I gotta be real. There's a lot of fucking flaws. There's a lot of things in my description where I talked about where I talked about how great this episode is. I had to skip. You probably noticed I was skipping over a few things. Yeah, because they don't make any sense and they're dumb. For example, how does Flint? I know he's immortal. And I know he's lived for a long time, and he's rich, which we're throwing aside the Federation shouldn't use money, but let's throw that aside. He really has the technology to take a starship, the Enterprise, and turn it into a tiny, like, model size. The fuck he does. What is he, magic? I guess he did say he was Merlin. But still, is he fucking Q? No, he's not Q. Stop it. You can't be Q. You can't do shit like that. That's ridiculous. And of course, the biggest ridiculous, as I already mentioned, is the romance between Kirk and Reyna. He's known her for 2 minutes. Now, I do like the scenes between Kirk and Reyna. I actually would prefer these to a lot of the Kirk romances, but then they get overboard where he's acting like he's head over heels in love with her, and he's his deepest love that he's ever had, when they don't. Like, they didn't talk for like 2 minutes, for fuck's sake. And he's acting like, that she's his lifelong partner and they've been married for years and wants him to run away and spend the rest of their life together. You don't fucking know her. And then, other ridiculous thing, how, Kirk and Flynn have to physically fight each other. And then Spock is like, maybe rightfully is like, maybe you shouldn't be, fighting this guy. He's like, stop it, Spock, don't interfere. We're fighting over a woman. That is masculine chest-beating bullshit. You don't fight over a woman. A woman should choose who she wants to be with. Like, two men, like, physically fighting over her is the dumbest fucking thing ever. And the fact that Kirk does this with Flynn is so stupid. And I guess these scenes, even when I claimed to have really liked this episode as a teenager, these scenes did sort of annoy me. But again, I would hand wave them away in my mind and ignore it because I wanted to like this episode because I liked the other stuff about it so much. But now I gotta acknowledge that it's dumb. It's very dumb. Yeah, but other than that, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Not really. Like, I liked some of the scenes with the M5, the robot that was clearly on a string. That was actually, again, that added to the sense of danger and foreboding. Like, I love the scene when Spock, like, phasered and destroyed it, and they were talking to Flint, and Flint's like, oh, it must have malfunctioned, and Kirk's like, well, if it was still here, I granted you would correct, and then all of a sudden, it just flies right back. And then Kirk's like, what the fuck? He's like, oh yeah, I couldn't live without it, so I made another one. That was cool. I like the stuff like that. And also, but back to the topic of flaws, another thing I didn't mention about that is definitely hit against this episode is he's not fucking Leonardo da Vinci and Brahms, and how that doesn't make any logical sense because a lot of people. I watched this video where someone was trying to headcanon and rationalize how he could be all these people because they have notably recorded history have aged from childhood to old age. If this guy never ages, how could he pretend to be these people? Now, the headcanon thing I watched was saying, well, there's this period in history that would point out for each. I think Brahms was the only one they could point out for, but for other of these historical figures, they could point out a point in history like Alexander the Great and Leonardo da Vinci. They could point out a point where they were like missing or something for like several months or several years. So it said, oh, they actually died, and Flint assumed her identity. So how could he make themselves look exactly like them? Because surely they would run into someone who knew the real Da Vinci and be like, hey, you look nothing like him. Is he also a shapeshifter? And even so, like, let's say he took over Da Vinci's life when Da Vinci was 28. How could he be, 60? And since Flint never ages, he would still look like he was 28 after 30 years, and no one would notice this. So it's a very flawed premise, and also the whole thing about Spock saying, "Oh, this is an original Da Vinci painting, and this is an original work from Brahms, but it's not recorded. It's whatever." Couldn't it just be an artist, copying the style? Like, that's what I'm thinking. Like, how does he know it's actually Brahms? So surely, especially with centuries passing, surely there would be people who would be able to do something a painting that's very similar to Da Vinci, or a piece of music that's very similar to Brahms, but more contemporary. How would he know the difference between oh my god, this is definitely Brahms, but it's nothing everyone's heard of? Like, I don't buy that. But, so yeah, that's something that always pisses me off. But now I'm going to talk about, I believe his name was Jerome Bixby, who wrote this episode, because it's an interesting concept, and I did mention this before in, I think, my seasonal review, that he actually wrote a movie. I think, oh god, I can't recall if he was actually still alive when the movie was made. He might not have been. But there was a movie made based off his script called The Man from Earth. I believe it was made for a Sci-Fi Channel movie, so it was a low-budget movie, but it featured a lot of Star Trek alumni, like John Billingsley, who played Phlox, Tony Todd, of course, who played Kern, and future Jake Sisko, and I believe, it had that one dude who appeared in several Star Trek episodes, guest starring, like he was in The Inner Light as Bukai, and then he was like in the Irish pub bullshit they had in Voyager. He was also the jumping to conclusions guy from Office Space. But anyway, I remember when I was reviewing that Voyager episode, I kept saying he's jumping to conclusions. But anyway, so that movie is basically just one long conversation. It's just people in the room talking. Sometimes they go outside and talk, but it's a very sort of intellectual movie. So it's about, like, all the characters in there are like college professors, so they're all like intellectual, and one of them reveals that he's lived for thousands of years, and at first they don't believe him, but then he recounts his life story, and then the intellectual college professors debate it. I think it's a really interesting movie, and I was just going online and watching it, and it's free to watch online. If you want to look it up on YouTube, you can watch it. It's and I was looking it up, and there's tons of people who love it, who think it is an absolutely great movie, and I could see, and so it was the movie was kind of based off the idea that he did for this episode. But instead of like making a Star Trekified where it has to be, Kirk and whatever encountering them, and there has to be a threat of the week, and there has to be them dumb plot about an android girlfriend, it's instead just, intellectuals sitting in a room drinking some coffee and talking about his life. And one of the figures that in the original script for this episode, they wanted to say that Flint was also Jesus at one stage, and that he was Moses, but the NBC execs shot that down, like, no, you're gonna offend religious people if you do that. And they're probably right, especially for the 60s. But in the movie, The Man from Earth, he did do that. The guy did reveal he was Jesus, and it's funny because they actually put a character in the movie who was totally offended by this because she was really religious, and she was like very upset that he was claiming to be Jesus, and she's like, "Why are you lying like this? This is bullshit." But the movie's implying, of course, that he actually was, and I thought that was actually really, really interesting. And I think John Billingsley actually is really good in this movie. I would recommend it. And so hearing about this movie actually makes me appreciate this episode more, that this was kind of the basis for that movie. Apparently there was a sequel to that movie that was written by Drone Bixby's son, but I never watched that. Or maybe I will one day. But I don't think it needs a sequel. I thought it was pretty self-contained. It's just a long dialogue movie. In fact, I do think it drags a little bit, if I'm being honest. That's why I've been hesitant to. It's been several years since I watched it, and I'm hesitant to watch it again. But yeah, I don't know. I probably will sometime. But yeah, it does make me appreciate this episode more. But yeah, and I think the episode might be in some ways more interesting because of the sense of foreboding that's absent in the movie. But then again, this episode also has all those dumb flaws that I talked about earlier. Also, another thing I was going to mention, because someone else mentioned this who hated the episode, and I kind of agree, is that I think we actually needed to see the plague on the Enterprise. The episode starts with the captain's log saying, "We're all dying from a plague," and they never actually show anyone dying from a plague. Like when they go back, they have one scene where they do show the Enterprise to show Scotty and Uhura on the bridge. No one seems to be sick. I don't know. It just seems like. So we're being told and not shown of the danger, and Flint's referring, this plague ship, but I feel very disconnected to that because I haven't. It's just the Enterprise. I have not seen that they're affected by the plague, but maybe they could have spent more time on this plague and less time on this stupid robot girlfriend. But to be fair, and I don't think I mentioned this yet, I think the fact that Flint would make a robot girlfriend makes total sense. Because Immortal, he talked about having, dozens of wives, but they all, he outlives them all and they all die, and he would get sick of that and would want someone else who would also be immortal. That actually makes complete sense. And even though he did create her, if you think of a robot girlfriend, you might think of someone who's just like, "Oh, you are so hot, let me pleasure you at every chance." But no, he made her to be self-aware, self-sustained, and actually, to make her own choices and decisions. And so I totally buy this. I think that makes total sense. Now, I don't think we needed the plot of Kirk and him fighting over her, or the fact that she just dies because she can't decide who she wants to be with. That was stupid too. But the concept of him creating this robot girlfriend actually does make sense. And it's also interesting that he that he actually ends up living. He's not immortal anymore. That was an interesting twist that they threw in at the end. That he's actually, because he left Earth, that he's just going to live out a normal lifespan. So that's, I don't know. I think they could have played with that more as well. And also, I got to mention, in Voyager, they referenced this episode where Janeway, in the episode where she's hanging out with the Da Vinci hologram all the time, she mentions that Captain Kirk actually claims to have met Leonardo da Vinci, and she says it very dismissively, but there he is. But Kirk promised that he wouldn't. He promised Flint that he wouldn't tell anyone about him. But I think my sort of headcanon is that he waited till after Flint died, since he was going to live out a lifespan. He was obviously much, even in, age and appearance, like he was the appearance of a 60-year-old, so he would have died before Kirk. So, yeah, that's not that Kirk betrayed him, but that it was like, well, he's dead anyway, so they might as well know. I mean, why not? Anyway, another thing I just found out just today that blew my mind, I did not know this. Star Trek Enterprise actually planned to do a prequel episode with Flint in it in the season 5. And the more I hear about the stuff they were planning for season 5, the more upset I am that we didn't get a season 5. Sounds like it could have been even better than season 4. They were going to do an episode where they meet a scientist named Abrams, which is one of the aliases that Flint mentioned in this episode. In fact, I think it's the only one that's unrecognizable. Like all the other ones are Alexander the Great, Methuselah, and people who are known throughout history. And he throws in this Abrams, and so I think that was meant to be a historical figure from the fictional universe of Star Trek. So, in other words, between 1960 and the 23rd century. And so the Enterprise was going to say that he was a scientist who knew Zefram Cochrane and whatever Jonathan Archer's father's name. I can't remember his father's name, but he knew them, and they were going to meet him, and he was going to go on the Enterprise, and Phlox was going to find out that he was immortal, but then keep his silence and not tell anyone. That would have been cool. I would have loved to see that. But, that is just me. Alright, so now I got to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me. It is, of course, very much appreciated. We have Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavalles, Brian A., Alessandro Migalacio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howells. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. Now, I do have a few patron comments for this episode to read. First comment is from Ricky, who says, I actually like this episode. I admit it is a slow-paced one, but still a good episode. I like the concept of the guy being thousands years old and yet apparently human, and that he had great knowledge of the ancient history times. This is a case where it's mainly dialogue instead of the more action-orientated episodes of TOS. However, I do think that Kirk flirting with the daughter got out of hand, and that was a downside. But the ending reveal of who the guy is was very satisfying. I totally bought it. So I like this one. My rating is an 8 out of 10. Yep. Me and Ricky, as always, pretty much on the same page. So next comment is from Matty Jester, who says, in this episode, Kirk falls in love with someone becomes angry and fights a rival for their affections, all in less than 2 hours. Roughly the same amount of time I've spent waiting for crappy Papa John's delivery where they forgot the chicken wings. Nope, it's a poor score for this episode from Maddie. 3 out of 10. Thumbs down emoji. Fair enough, Maddie. I mean, as I said, I totally get it. Why people could focus on that. I do like the joke about how he fell in love with her in the same amount of time he spent waiting for chicken wings from Papa John's. Why would you order chicken wings from Papa John's? Anyway, I didn't even know they had chicken wings, but it's been decades since I ordered from them. Anywho, next comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, Requiem for Methuselah. If there's a plague on the Enterprise, why don't we see it? Why do the ship's captain, first officer, and doctor beam down to Flint's planet without any quarantine measures or protective clothing? Reyna says she wants to debate physics with Spock, so why doesn't it happen? Kirk and Reyna never actually talk with each other. Why all this we're fighting over a woman crap? An immortal is an interesting idea, but why make Flint fall in love with his robot? I'd like to get Daj and Soji's opinion on this episode. I hate it. At least they left Scotty out of it this time. Watch TNG's The Offspring instead. 3 drunk Vulcans out of 10. And again, that's fair. You two obviously don't like this episode as much as I do, but that's actually very common, as most people don't. But if I may be so bold, not just to you two in particular, but to everyone who hates this episode, I think you're focusing too much on the one aspect of this episode that sucks. I think there's other aspects such as the sense of foreboding, the sense of danger, the intriguing mystery, and the interesting reveal of who Flint was that you're neglecting. That these are actually good things, and you're just focusing on the negative, glass half full. But that's just my humble. Granted, and I will admit to being completely blinded by nostalgia on this one. So, that's just me. So anyway, I'm gonna agree with Ricky. So my rating for Requiem for Methuselah out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. I actually really like this episode, despite its very obvious flaws. Now, I can't call it a 9. Definitely not a 10, because those flaws are too big. Particularly the whole Kirk falling in love and the time you can get. I have to wait for chicken wings from Papa John's. That's totally true. And he's like madly in love too. He's like, oh, I love you so much. And he's like crying over her, and that wasn't earned at all. But other aspects, like, I think, as I said, I think it makes total sense why Flint would build an android. And I think the sense of foreboding of the plague and how he's fucking with them and the eeriness of M4 or whatever, the robot on the string, it was very effective. And I think it makes it a unique episode. As I was watching it just now, that's one thing in particular I noticed, that especially having gone through almost all the original series now, is that this episode didn't seem like a typical TOS episode. It seemed unique. And I think that's also another reason why I was always attracted to it. That it's not your typical Kirk, Spock, and McCoy beamed down and they have do their Western bullshit or whatever. It's something unique. And the whole thing with, the whole thing with Flint turning the Enterprise into a model, that is reminiscent of Cat's Paw, to be fair, but that was like a necklace in that case. So that part's a bit ridiculous, I admit. But I think overall, it is really interesting. So, yeah, I know. And if you disagree with me, as I said, it's not like Alternative Factory where I think you're insane and I really don't understand you. But I do understand you. I get it. I can understand why anyone wouldn't like this episode. But that is just me. So, that is it for my review of Requiem for Methuselah, which I know I've never pronounced that right, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. So coming up next on my channel on Monday, I'll be back over on Patreon for another revisited, this time for a revisit for the Savage Curtain. So this is the point, and I talked about this when I did my season review, that the end of season 3, a lot of people say it sucks, but for me, it's like, it's a good episode, bad episode, good episode, bad episode, good episode, bad episode. So we had Cloud Miners, which is a great episode. So good episode. Then Way to Eden, which is a shitty episode. So bad episode. Then Requiem for Methuselah, good episode. Then back to the Savage Curtain, terrible episode. Then All Our Yesterdays, great episode. And then Turnabout Intruder, the worst episode of the entire fucking show. So good episode, bad episode. That's just my opinion. I know most people would just say they're all bad, scrum. But anyway, Wednesday will be another back on YouTube, my main channel, for a new review for All Our Yesterdays, which sadly will be the last new review I do for the original series. Because then the only other episode after that is Turnabout Intruder, which I have already reviewed. So on Thursday, I'll be back over on Patreon to do my revisited for Turnabout Intruder, which will end my coverage of TOS. So then Saturday, I'm going to release the my top 10 best episodes of the original series, and then Monday, my top 10 worst episodes of the original series. Now, these videos will be truncated versions of the ones I did, because you might be saying, oh, well, you already have a top 10 of the original series. That was like a 15-20 minute video, and then I did my top 40 or whatever, or 30 best episodes of the original series, and that video is like 2 hours. The point of these two videos are to be like 4 minutes long. So, sort of trying to attract more people to my channel, if I'm being blunt. Trying to be more accessible to those. And maybe I may even make it a short. I gotta figure out how to do shorts in my channel. Just really short, 3 to 4 minutes. Those are my favorite and least favorite episodes. So, yeah. So, that's what's coming up on my channel. And then, of course, I will be doing my live stream with my sister Alyssa as time to be determined, sometime after that, where we will go over your top 10 favorite and least favorite episodes of the original series. I've already received a bunch of submissions, so thank you for everyone who has submitted. But if you haven't, please do so. You have up until the stream airs, because I will count them all the way up until the stream airs. So if you haven't done that, please submit your top 10 best, top 10 worst episodes in a comment. That comment will be deleted. It won't be seen by anyone except for me, so no one else is affected by it, but I will definitely add it and contabulate the scores and read out what the final result of what all the viewers have voted for their top 10 favorite and least favorite. I'm really looking forward to that. So thanks so much for watching. As I said, check out my channel as I wrap up my coverage of the original series, and I also cover many other Star Trek videos, as well as many other videos on many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.